Hey guys, Fishmonger here. Little quick follow-up video about some of the custom cables that I'm manufacturing for people for their GPU systems and their risers and all that good stuff. And I wanted to quick skim on the reason I'm doing what I'm doing is because situations like this, like that you're seeing on the screen right now, are just becoming commonplace, and unfortunately it shouldn't be. These are cables that people use, and they've got nothing to do with SATA, but they're PCIe cables that are melting and burning and causing all sorts of problems. And this should not be happening. Nobody should have to deal with a 6 or an 8-pin connector in their cable melting or catching fire and potentially damaging their system and potentially burning their house down. So I've took it upon myself to say, let me start making some custom cables for people, and this is what I've been doing, and this is a quick video to showcase why. So I did a little research, and I'm trying to figure out the root cause of the issues with a lot of these cables and why they're all catching on fire. And there's really only two things that are at play here: is the terminals of the pins that are on the cables and the wire itself. So the easiest thing for me to do would really be to check the wire. So I went out and bought a couple different cables from a couple different manufacturers, and I did some quick tests, and I found that not all cables are created equally. And sometimes if they say 20 AWG on them, doesn't necessarily mean that they're actually 20 AWG wire. For those who don't know, AWG actually stands for the American Wire Gauge. It's a standard to which wires are supposed to be manufactured. It doesn't just mean gauge. It's the American Wire Gauge. It's like saying something is 3 inches. Inches is a standard. You can't call something 3 inches if it's not 3 inches long. You can't call something 20 gauge wire if it's not 20 gauge wire. And just to note, G-A-U-G-E, the word gauge, if something says 20 gauge, that does not mean it's 20 AWG or the American Wire Gauge. One's a standard, one's just a word. So keep that in mind when you're looking at your cables. If it's stamped with, and it helps if I actually come to the right screen, if it's stamped with 20 or 16 or 18 AWG, it needs to conform to, like I said, a certain set of standards. In this case, I have a cable in front of me, and this is, it's a splitter. It's a Molex 4-pin to Molex 4-pin splitter. And it is rated at 20 gauge cable. Yeah, it says it's 20 gauge cable. So I cut and stripped some, and then basically using my micrometers here, I can check them, my digital calipers. I got a measurement of about 0.28, 0.29, I'm sorry, 0.028, 0.029, 0.028 inches. And for 20 gauge cable, we actually should be hitting 0.032, if you see that there. So this is slightly under, not by much, but it looks like it's closer to a 21 gauge cable. The reality of it is, in the grand scheme of things, probably not going to make a huge difference as long as you're not drawing full to, close to full capacity on these anyway. But it could potentially cause an issue. And oh man, I didn't even notice this before. Those are some ugly terminals. See if I can pull these out. On the inside here. Okay, well, that came out easily. But wow, can you see that? I'm gonna try to show this. Okay, so look at all that copper wire that's just hanging out there. Do you see that? And I literally just pulled this out right now. So I'm seeing this the same time you're seeing this. But basically, all that wire that's not underneath the crimp barrel itself in the crimp area, is basically wire that's doing absolutely nothing. It's just hanging out. This is what happens when you take two wires and try to jam them inside of a pin that's not designed for two wires of that size. You end up with wire that just doesn't make it in and just kind of sits hanging out. So this is, one of those issues that you deal with crap cables, is that they're manufacturing these things on a plant. They're making thousands of things at a time. Do you really think they 100% QC check every single one of these? No, they don't. It's a major, major issue. Here's another cable I got. I love this one. This was a 6-pin PCIe to, I think it was actually a 12-pin SATA, but it might have been a splitter that split into something else. Personally, I forgot. But I do remember the fact that this is clearly marked with manufacturer name of, on here somewhere, oh, Pacific CSA cable, and it clearly states that this is, it usually helps if I actually hold it the right direction, this is 18 AWG, or 18 American wire gauge cable. So I stripped a couple of these off and I twisted them up, and when I check the measurements on this, I'm getting around 0.031, 0.030, 0.032, 031 inches. And if this truly is 18 gauge cable, I should be getting 0.0403, not 0.0301. 0301, again, is closer to like a 20 or a 21 gauge cable. And the problem is that, you know, you're not going to be able to pull as much current through this cable. It's going to be severely limited because the cross section of the wire itself is a lot smaller. So, you know, people use cables like this in their manufacturing, and they you know, maybe it's not their fault. They say, oh, look, it's 18 gauge cable, I'll rate it electrically to what an 18 gauge cable is, not realizing that it's not an 18 gauge cable. And people hook them up and they get overloaded, and then you end up with melted cables and you end up with junk. Now, there is a major build quality difference in a lot of different cables I've seen out there. I did not cut this cable apart because, quite honestly, I can tell, and I've been working with cables for many, many years, but I can tell just by looking at this and the fact that it's got a clear connector on it and seeing the wires on the inside and seeing the crimping on there. This was done on a machine, and this machine was 100% hitting every single one of these terminals, the same exact spot every single time. I actually use these cables myself, and I've never had any problems with them. I forgot the brand name, but they do work well. And if well, you know what? For science, let's do it. I think I'm ruining a perfectly good cable, but that's perfectly fine. Let's do a strip here. Ooh, now that's interesting. First thing I'm taking a look at here, I've got, all right, I lost a couple strands doing this in a rush. This is a plated copper wire. This is not a bare copper wire. This is plated, probably tin plated, and it's looking pretty thick. And if I were to measure this right now, I'm getting about 0.043, 0.042, 0.043 inches, and that's even after I cut a couple of the strands away. So 0.0403 inches would put this at an 18 gauge cable, which makes perfect sense because it actually is stamped as an 18 gauge cable. I knew I just ruined a very good cable there, but I'll just connect that again. It'll be a little bit shorter and no big loss. But what I've been doing is taking this information that the cables suck, and it's possible that people are using the wrong kind of terminals. There's actually a lot of different kind of pins and terminals in the Molex MiniFit 55, 56, and 55, 57 series for the connectors and the terminals. But, you know, the differences I've read on a lot of them are not very great. You know, they make gold-plated brass. They got phosphor-plated bronze. They've got gold-plated silver connectors. A whole bunch of different kinds of connectors. But the majority of them are rated anywhere from like 12 amps to 9 amps. I think was the lowest one I saw was a 9 amp contact rating. And quite honestly, even if the cheapest one to use were a 9 amp contact rating, given the fact that you've got 3 on there in a 6-pin connector, you're looking at a potential of 27 amps max rating. Let's say we lower the spec and say we're only going to draw 7 amps from them. You're still looking at 21 amps of capacity on that 1 6-pin connector. You take the 21 amps, you multiply it by the 12 volts, you're looking at 252 theoretical watts, or 250 watts you can pull from a single 6-pin connector and not have any problems, even if your pins are only spec'd at 7 amps. So 250 watts is quite a lot. For a 6-pin, that's quite a lot. So whenever I build my cables, I always state that the max you should draw from each particular cable itself is about 250 watts, which is generally about 2 GPUs that are being downclocked to like 120 watt max or 110 watt max, or 1 GPU if you're really trying to like really power it up like really high, full power itself. So just a quick note here, what I have been doing when I make my cables is I actually strip my wires a little bit longer than they should be, because normally what you would do in a cable like this is the area here where it's like that black insulation would actually be up about here, and it would end here, because this back area would be crimped down over this black insulation and be used as a strain relief. So if you bend the wire back and forth a whole bunch of times, it doesn't cause metal fatigue and damage the wire on the inside of the connector. But what I do, because I just know from experience that nobody's taking these connectors and they're bending them back and forth 8,000 times. You pretty much plug them in once and you're done. I mean, if you move them around 10 times, that's fine. You're not bending them thousands of times back and forth. Is I build these and I strip my wires long and I crimp, and I basically have the whole connector itself make contact with the copper on the wire. And the reason I do that is for increased electrical connection. You know, the more metal contact you have between your wire and your terminal, the less voltage you're going to lose, the less resistance you're going to have in the whole circuit, and basically you're going to allow yourself cleaner power and a higher power delivery from point A to point B. So the fact that they don't do this, quite honestly, I think is they're losing out on a lot of potential power here, but you know, the manufacturers don't do that. I do that because I know that this is really the superior way to do it. Some people look at this and say, oh, well, you know, you're not crimping on the insulation on the back, so now, you know, potentially, how do I know that the wire is not going to pull out? Because you're only crimping on, you know, metal-to-metal connection. You don't have a metal to a insulation jacket. Well, that's a good question. But I go one step beyond this, and I will solder over every single one of my wire connections. Because I can guarantee you, you ain't going to pull this wire out when I'm done soldering it. If anything, you're going to break the terminal out of the connector before you separate this connection. This is 10 times stronger than any crimp connection over the insulation will get you. And not only that, but I've just further increased the ability for this pin to carry an electrical current in a superior fashion than if it was just crimped. Because anybody who does electronics knows that when you solder over a connection like this, you are really allowing the current to flow through and all your nice little electrons to go from point A to point B without causing any kind of other issues or loss of power, because I am really getting a maximum contact connection here. So yeah, you're not going to pull my cables out. That's the short of it. And then for those who are questioning, saying, well, if you strip the thing long, how do I know when you put it in the connector that I'm not going to have metal wires hanging out the back of the connector? That's a very good question. But that's also not something you have to worry about here, because you can see in this example that I've not only stripped my wire and I've crimped and soldered it, but I also left a pretty big gap on the back of it. If this goes inside the connector, just like this, I still have this whole area on the back where the insulation is on the inside of the connector. I don't have any bare metal wires sticking out here. You can see this on the rest of the connectors here. I don't have any connectors, or there's not any metal sticking out the back. I realized that my mouse pointer was on the wrong screen this whole time, so I was pointing to over here when I said the gap, and you didn't see that because I was actually using the other screen. Sorry about that. So as I stated, I make custom cables for people. Everyone's been happy with everything that I've sold them. You know, I don't do this for free, and I don't do these for cheap, because, you know, buying thousands of feet of wire at a time and thousands of pins at a time is not exactly a cheap endeavor. But at the same time, I also know that it's thousands and thousands of dollars of equipment I could potentially be saving, and I want to kind of give back to some of the people that have helped me out before in the past. So I took on this challenge, and I've been making these cables. I like taking ideas from people on different things that I can make, and one of the latest ones I've done is actually this cable here. This is from point A here, which would actually get connected into your power supply, you know, your server power supply, 20 inches long over to here, to this connector. It's a 6-pin to 6-pin male, okay? This would get plugged into your riser, and then coming off the back of this, I've got other cables that would plug into the top of your video card, right? So I've got one cable that basically plugs into your riser and your video card. So one cable doesn't require you to get a splitter or anything like that. one cable basically just powers one video card. So it kind of works out perfect because, quite honestly, a lot of people have those breakout boards on the back of their server power supplies where it's got like the 12 connectors, and it just so happens that a lot of people also run those BTC Pro motherboards that run up to like 12 risers. Some have more, and that's fine, but majority don't. Majority of people run 12 or less GPUs in a system, and I could easily make it so on that one board, you could plug right into a 6-pin and have it go into a 6-pin to a 6 or 6+2. I've actually got connectors that are also 6+2 connectors. So I can make it so you've got 12 clean cables running right into your 12 risers, right into your 12 GPUs, all plugged in, not having crazy wires going all over the place. And I know somebody actually suggested before, you know, can I make different length cables? Well, of course I can, because I cut all these cables myself. So if you have a system like I do, where I have all my GPUs set up, I've got like 8 GPUs or 6 GPUs lined up in a row. I actually have the breakout board for my power supply kind of in the middle, below everything. So what I did when I made my cables for my rig is I made the 2 cables for the outside connectors, you know, the GPUs, a little bit longer than the 2 that go to the next 2. Then the 2 that go to the other 2 in the middle, and the 2 that come to the middle after that, they're the shortest ones. Because they don't all need to be the same length, because if I made them all the same length, then the ones in the middle have a ton of slack on them. And, you know, it's silly for me, since I'm making these all one at a time anyway, why do I have to make them all the same length? That's just a waste of wire. I might as well make them all the exact length that I need, which is what I did. So if you've got a rig or a system that you set up, or you're going to be setting up, and you want to get some really high quality, made in the USA, by me, certified, by me, stamp of approval, by me, blessed, buy me cables, you know, send me an email, wowfishmonger@yahoo.com. Make a little note in the video down below. You're interested in some cables. You know, I do have some stock cables that I make too, but quite honestly, I'd really rather just make custom cables for people, because I think it's a lot more beneficial for everybody in their custom mining rigs that they run. I have enough equipment to probably make about 120 cables right now. If anybody wants to give me a volume order of like 1,000 cables, I'll be more than welcome to do that. But I'm going to need a little bit of lead time, because I only have so many Saturday afternoons I can work on these things. If you like this video, please give it a like and a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it if anybody wants to see any other future videos of mine. Hit that little bell on the bottom there. It's a notification bell. Basically, you're just notified whenever I upload a new video, because I like making videos, and seems like lately a lot of my later videos are not really getting a lot of views. Not really sure why. I would appreciate it though also if you could spread the word on, you know, myself making cables like this or this particular video, because any word of mouth that I can get out there for information like this is beneficial to me and helps me. And you could be helping somebody else, saving their lives, saving their rigs, getting them a really nice looking rig also with some really nice quality cables. And it's a win-win situation for both of us. So this is Fishmonger. I'm signing out. I will catch you on the flip side.